You're about to get a month-long break from me, so I figured I'd let us go out with something really apocalyptic. When you sleep, how many of you would say you have more dreams than nightmares? Okay. How many of you would say you have more nightmares than dreams? Okay. I wonder how you know you're having one and not the other. When I was very young, I was debilitated by nightmares that plagued me with visions of drooling monsters, sharp-toothed sharks, cackling witches, silently menacing ghosts, natural and very unnatural disasters, the end of the world, all of the After Dark classics. I had recurring characters. I had ongoing storylines, one-off specials, everything you can think of. I became a preschool-aged prophet of middle-of-the-night doom. And my parents, in some moment of annoyed desperation, told me about a trick that could end my sleep-deprived suffering. And it's a trick I think they made up. My mother is here. She can tell you the truth after the service. They told me to repeat the phrase, "I won't dream about it," 3 times every night. I won't dream about it. I won't dream about it. I won't dream about it. I tried it that night, it worked, and it became my willful mantra, my statement of faith, my promise to myself, however superstitious. And I stopped having nightmares. But also, in the past 30 years, I have basically remembered at most 5 dreams. Essentially, I stopped dreaming. The past year has felt a lot like a nightmare. We get respites and scenes that are less terrifying, but horror seems to lurk just below the surface all the time. And when the nightmares descend while you're awake, saying, "I won't dream about it, I won't dream about it, I won't dream about it," just doesn't cut it. Everything right now feels very apocalyptic. Now, we've started to use this term apocalypse somewhat incorrectly over the past little while. Thanks to cinema and television that regularly shows us supernatural threats to the world we know, apocalypse has started to simply mean end times, the end of the world, usually something devastating and violent in need of witty, weapon-wielding heroes like my favorite patron saint of fierce valley girls, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We've thrown apocalypse around for so long that when we hear it, we can immediately call up the images of destruction and terror that our media has packaged for us. But end times is not the original definition of apocalypse, no matter what our Hollywood inventions tell us. Now, don't get me wrong, I love how apocalypse is presented on our screens. But in ancient times, the word apocalypse meant an unveiling, a disclosure, an uncovering of knowledge, a revelation, a visionary gift that might help humans make sense of nightmares on earth. And that's what our ancient testimony is today. That angry little final book hitched on to the end of our Christian Bible, the Revelation of John, was called an apocalypse in ancient times, not necessarily because it was a handbook for the actual end times, but because it was a revealing exploration of how one person dreamed God's plan might take shape on earth. Now, be honest. How many of you try to avoid the book of Revelation? Okay. Have you ever read it? Got it. Did your preachers preach about it when you were young and terrify the entire neighborhood before being run out of town? No? I can't remember ever hearing a preacher of my youth approach this literary minefield, not once. Our lectionary, which tells preachers what texts to explore on each Sunday of each year, barely even touches Revelation. And when it does, only carefully selected passages like ours today make the cut. Never mind that this lovely little snippet of text also includes some characteristically misogynistic language and is followed by John saying that all bad people will be cast into a lake of fire. Much of John's Revelation feels like a nightmare. For you freaky fabulous, there's even a dragon. This little paragraph we read together today is among the only dream respites within its more terrifying narrative. And if that's not clear enough already, John's Revelation conveniently fits into the narrative of conservative millennialist theology. You know, that theology that tells you that the world is going to end imminently. We more liberal, progressive, love wins Christians have shied away from the book of Revelation, leaving it to be used by those who seem to need it more. So what do we faithful do when our current world actually starts feeling like the horror show at the center of John's nightmare? Well, the history of the book of Revelation and how it ended up as the finale of our New Testament is far more complicated than the culture war between crazy conservatives and lazy liberals. So, crash course history lesson, you ready? The first two things to know about this book we Christians call Revelation is, one, it is called Revelation, singular, not revelations, plural, as many have called it. This is one singular revelation, probably written by one singular specific person named John at a specific time. Two, at the beginning of this book, there are 7 separate, specific letters written to 7 separate, specific early Christian churches. Why is this important? Because above all, this text is a very specific revealing of vision and faith from one specific person to other specific people. We can look at these letters at the start of John's book, sort of like we look at the letters of Paul. Basically, writings intended to be read in very specific contexts that have now been given universal, absolutistic meaning that might never have been intended by its author. So here's the big thing. We've got one book at the end of our New Testament called Revelation. But at the time this guy John was writing his Revelation, there were tons of other people writing their own revelations. John's revelation was revealing his own experience, his own nightmare vision, but it wasn't the final word. It was his specific words, his specific experience meant to bump up against the specific words and experience of others, other people who were revealing their own visions, and John knew this. It might have even been part of the plan, that bumping up of experiences. John basically wrote his revelation around the end of the 1st century CE, when Jesus' followers were in a heavy research and development phase. Jesus had been dead for a while. His followers were social outcasts, and this was basically a time of flailing around and testing visions out, a phase of exploring the traumatic nightmare of a community losing Jesus at the hands of the empire, and of knocking different dreams together to see what stuck. Now, John's revelation, this troubling little nightmare vision, is just one of the many ways that Jesus lovers were recording revelations that were coming to them. These folks probably had no inkling that they might be writing for people who would be living centuries after they died. And you know why? Because they thought that the world was going to end imminently. Clearly, they were wrong, unless we're living in some other upside-down dimension unawares, and I will gladly entertain that option. Please come and find me. I love to talk about upside-down dimensions. But the world probably didn't end, and it hasn't yet. But somewhere along the way, some Christians started believing that John's vision was exactly what will happen when the world ends, and other Christians got scared of John's vision and threw the dragon baby out with the bloody bathwater and decided to ignore the book of Revelation and see if it might just go away and slither somewhere else. And I think something in between these two extremes is what we faithful need today. The world didn't end way back when John and all the others had their apocalyptic visions. The world continued, and we kept making this world messier and messier, and we've created things that are even more terrifying than the dreamy dragons of ancient nightmare visions. In fact, much like my beloved Buffy the Vampire Slayer would say, it's not the end of the world, and that's too bad. Because that we're really good at. We are really good at creating threats and fear that might make death seem like the easier choice. But when the world doesn't actually end, we have to continue. And as Saint Buffy also once said, the hardest thing in this world is to live in it. So here's where history gets really interesting and really, really terrifying. A few centuries after John wrote his Revelation, and after Emperor Constantine had adopted Christianity as the official empire religion, and it was on its way to becoming legitimate, dangerous, and basically boring, a bishop named Athanasius, a guy who had all kinds of agendas up his sleeve, decided to create a closed canon of Christian scripture, a canon that would be the be-all and end-all of sacred Christian texts. The visions within this closed canon would not be open to supplementation or reimagination as they had been. Instead, this closed canon, these books of the Old Testament and the New Testament, would be fixed, unchanging, forever concretized. And Athanasius decided that the revelation of John would be the end of our canon because it added an Old Testament-tested, slightly bitter, truly final finish. Athanasius changed Christian history by dismissing all other revelations, by all other early Jesus followers, deeming them heretical and throwing them into the proverbial lake of fire. But that's not the way it had been for several centuries. The research and development phase of early Christianity was all about multiple revelations, plural, all about turning nightmares of what could happen into dreams of what could happen. Thanks to the exclusively unifying agenda of Athanasius, a constrictingly defined Christian dream was born. One dream that felt like a nightmare to anyone who had thought John's revelation was just part of the story up till then. This Christian dream then fed into other things like the American dream, and neither the Christian dream or the American dream are bad things at their root, but both can be a bit myopic and single-minded. But nightmarish times don't call for clinging to our nightmares and calling them dreams. And nightmarish times don't call for us to pretend that we can wish our nightmares away. After 3 decades of me saying my "I won't dream about it" mantra and barely experiencing any of the true delights of dreams, I finally decided, not too long ago, to stop saying it, just to see what might happen. Now, every night is filled with vibrant visions that range from the scary to the sacred. No joke. I stopped trying to hide from the nightmares and opened myself up to dreams instead. And when a nightmare comes, I just wake Matt up and talk through it until it seems more manageable. Sorry, Matt. That's what we can do together. That's what church is for. I dream again because I stopped trying to hide from nightmares. Nightmarish times call for us to deeply listen to every single revelation that is coming from every single person around us. No story is your story. No other dream is perfectly your dream. Nightmarish times call for active research and development projects like those early Christians where we say, hey, here's my vision. How does it line up with your vision? This is not how much of the world is living right now. Many are living like Athanasius, cutting themselves off from the revelations of others, insisting that their revelation is the only valid one. For them, listening feels like the nightmare. But our tradition of revelation is all about listening to God and to one another. We need to talk about fear until it reforms into faith. Before we try to eradicate fear, we need to listen to it. And we certainly can't rely on one single vision to do that for us. Christianity has never validly relied on one single vision. It's relied on countless visions in conversation with one another. This is our tradition. This is the content of our faith. It's not the end of the world. We've thought that was coming for centuries now, and we've been wrong. Apocalypse is not the end of the world. We are one another's apocalypses. So, as you sit in your apocalypse state at table together, and we gather our communion elements to move into our communion moment, get to know the folks around you. What can you reveal? What can they reveal? It's basically what we Christians have tried to be doing for centuries.